250 metres to go. Fine Cotton still the leader. He's about a neck in front. Harbour Girl's
in the
coming
three
in
eastern states have shown at least 10 people are principal figures in the Fine Cotton ring-in.
The swap appeared to have been well organised.
Inquiry into the Fine Cotton substitution
could have netted more than $1 million for those who planned it.
What will happen to the real Fine Cotton?
I fear the worst, but naturally hope for the best for the horse itself anyway.
The date is August 18, 1984, at Eagle Farm Racecourse in Brisbane, Australia. One race was supposed to be a rather minor event in the scheme of things, a novice handicap race, which are generally for inexperienced horses or horses who have never won. Depends on the racing authority. But in this particular race, people soon noticed that it was attracting unusual attention, with various bettors and bookmakers laser focused on this one event. The winner of this race was a horse that had had its feet almost run off the poor thing. He had run an obscene number of races in the lead up to this event and had always placed towards the back, and so, by any form of rhyme or reason, he should have been a high-priced outsider with practically no chance at all. And yet, on this day, Fine Cotton had won as an extremely short-priced favourite.
Fine Cotton's kicking again on the inside. Fine Cotton and Harbour Girl. Fine Cotton's in front. They're drawing to the line. He's just in front. Fine Cotton, Harbour Girl lunge right on the line. They hit it all. Gee, this is close.
And after this race, a bunch of guys afterwards started calling out, "Ring in! Ring in!" Because, as was soon to be painfully evident, Fine Cotton was not Fine Cotton at all. The race winner was, in fact, a much higher class horse that was made to resemble Fine Cotton. The shouting woke up the local authorities from their blind slumber and began an investigation that involves gangsters, an unlucky trainer, used car salesman, a large bucket of hair dye, and a poor, sweet, innocent pair of horses. Over the course of this two-part series, we will learn together how this could have very nearly been pulled off successfully, but for one tragic event that unravelled this originally well-laid plan and brought it into the realms of Three Stooges comedy.
The doghouse!
John Gillespie was serving time in jail for various dishonesty offences in Queensland. During this time, he ran across a guy called Pat Haitana, who was a horse jockey serving time for passing bad checks, and a number of people connected to a prominent Sydney criminal by the name of Mick Sayers. During their mutual holiday from society, it's reasonable to suspect that these guys hatched the plan then. You know, it's passing strange to me that these guys paid attention to Gillespie. He had previously arranged, in 1982, for the horse Apparent Hair to ring in for another called Manor Song. The problem for Gillespie in this case was that Apparent Hair failed to win that race. Mind you, he was not prosecuted for this attempt, but perhaps if he had been, we might not have this story of Fine Cotton today. But anyway, once these fine examples of Australian criminal thinking were out of jail, they decided to try the 1982 scam again. But first, these guys needed a trainer. Luckily for them, they had a connection. Pat's brother, Hayden Haitana. Next, they needed a pair of horses. One horse needed to be a much better racer than the other, and of course they had to look the same. Quite a difficult proposition in the general scheme of things, but like any good slime ball, Gillespie knew of two such horses. One was the soon-to-be famous Fine Cotton, which he bought for $1,000. The other was Dashing Saltaire, which was purchased for $10,000. The plan here, of course, is to run Dashing Saltaire as Fine Cotton in a race and for Dashing Saltaire to win as Fine Cotton. Now, Fine Cotton was a Class 3 novice, and Dashing Solitaire was a Group 2 horse. For my friends who don't know about horse racing, imagine a baseball match between the winner of the World Series against some random high school team. That is the sort of golfing class we're talking about here. Also, and this of course is extremely vital, these horses looked practically identical. Another crucial point is the fact that Fine Cotton was 9 years old at the time. So as a racehorse, the poor thing's days were numbered. So what's the scam here? How would you make money with a setup? You run your weaker horse hard, train the horse hard, and through all that exhaustive work, have it finish races poorly. Have it race frequently, and thus have a long and recent track record of poor performances. This, over time, drives the betting price to lofty heights. Then, once the price hits the odds you want, you substitute the better racer and watch them run away with the race. In perhaps a sign of things to come, in the last few setup runs before the main event, this criminal syndicate, their faces must have fallen when they saw Fine Cotton looming at the final turn, and he looked to be within a chance of at least finishing second, if not winning outright, which would bring the price way back down. But, fortunately for them, Fine Cotton showed his 9-year-old form and fell back in the field. You can imagine the looks on these guys' faces when this poor horse, who'd been trained and raced to near exhaustion, suddenly showed some form and looked like a chance of finishing well. Meanwhile, through all this, Dashing Solitaire is being quietly trained and breasted properly. All is going well. Then came the triggering event, 1 week before the culmination of all this hard work, which started the whole process of bringing what looked like a promising plan down to the level of a comedic farce. So this criminal syndicate were happily drinking in a bar on the Gold Coast, thinking of how they were going to spend their winnings in a week's time. Then, disaster. They receive word that their chosen ring-in has cut its hindquarters quite badly on some barbed wire. It was so bad that the horse Dashing Solitaire required stitches. The problem was that the horse was due to replace Fine Cotton in just a week, and there was no way in hell any self-respecting race steward, veterinarian inspector, any official would have allowed this horse to race. John Gillespie, no doubt a little pale-faced, got up from his table with his compatriots and made a phone call to the gangster Mick Sayers, who we mentioned earlier. After the call, he returns to his mates and flatly says that the show has to go on, otherwise someone was going to be killed if the ring-in did not happen as scheduled. I guess now is a good point to talk about Mick Sayers. He was a huge bettor and lived a good life in Sydney. He drove around in a Mercedes-Benz, had all the best stuff, you know the type. He was forever in and out of debt, which he largely paid off by selling illegal drugs. He owed a lot of money to a lot of people, including to the big cheese of crime in that area, a Mr. George Freeman. To put it in a way that my global viewers will understand, it was like, say, if Luca Brasi from the Goodfather films owed a lot of money to Don Vito Corleone. George Freeman controlled a lot of the bookmakers at the racecourses, so if you owed any of his bookmakers money, you owed George Freeman money. So, the order has been given. The boys need to come up with something, otherwise one or all of them are going to be murdered. It's not an idle threat either. People who upset George Freeman had a habit of disappearing. Not that I'm suggesting anything, mind, but it's clear enough that Mick Sayers felt the pressure from Freeman and passed that pressure on just as hard towards Gillespie and the gang. So now our friendly conspirators have to come up with a replacement for Dashing Saltaire. One idea apparently proposed was to actually have Fine Cotton race the original horse, after giving what was colloquially known as a bomb. And this was basically a tablet full of a vicious mix of drugs that just might have helped him discover his younger self and race like a pro. But thankfully, that idea was swiftly discarded. It was eventually decided that Gillespie would seek out a horse that had come to his notice some time ago, not to use as a ring in mind, but to purchase for a third party. And that horse was Bold Personality, based 4 hours away by road in Coffs Harbour. That horse was chosen to be the ring in. Now there was a problem with that idea. Bold Personality and Fine Cotton looked nothing like each other at all. The new horse had a different colour, was a different size, had different markings. Not in any way could these horses be called similar. But thanks to the time constraints, these guys had no other option open to them. So Gillespie sent one of the other conspirators off to Coffs Harbour with a bad check, because at this point they were basically out of money, and also provided him with a horse float towed by a Toyota Corolla. From there, the conspirator would bring the horse from Coffs Harbour back to Brisbane, where Bold Personality would be disguised as Fine Cotton and prepared for the race as soon as humanly possible. At this point, Mick Sayers approached George Freeman directly, who was a massive power amongst bookmakers, as we discussed earlier. He was a serious force to be reckoned with, especially in harness racing, where George's syndicates were known to pay off other riders in a race to let another win. It became so rife, this sort of corruption in harness racing, that at one point George Freeman had practically ruined harness racing in his state. At this point, Mick Sayers approached George Freeman directly and told him about the coming Fine Cotton scam attempt. Why would he do that, you might ask? Mick Sayers, as we had said earlier, owed a lot of money to Freeman, who controlled the bookmakers. No doubt Mick Sayers believed this information to be worth a good deal to Freeman. And it was, as we will learn later, but not in the way Mick Sayers intended. So, in this story, we have the likes of Gillespie on the bottom of this criminal enterprise. Above Gillespie and his compatriots is Mick Sayers, and ruling over the whole lot is George Freeman. And if this all works, everyone can clear their debts, and everyone can roll around in plenty of money. Blue skies and sunshine is on the way. But first, they have to get Bold Personality from Coffs Harbour and bring him to Brisbane. It was here that the group made another crucial mistake. The guy they sent to pick up the horse knew essentially nothing about horses. It was basically mid-August, which means, especially as you head further north in Australia, increasing heat and humidity. This guy's genius plan to maintain Bold Personality's welfare was to throw a winter blanket over the horse while it was standing inside a metal horse box for at least 4 hours of travelling on the road. As a result, the horse did arrive at Brisbane, suffering from severe dehydration. Fortunately, there is a swift way to rehydrate a horse, but it makes me personally just a little bit uncomfortable to think about this. So feel free to mute this video for about 30 seconds. They call this process flushing. What this meant for Bold personality was that a hose was pushed down one of his nostrils and turn the tap on and fill his belly as full of water as you dare. Fortunately for the horse, the initial procedure went off without a hitch until the gang went to remove the hose. As the hose was removed, it burst a blood vessel inside the poor thing's nose. Now, of course, if a vet detects that a horse has been bleeding recently, they won't allow it to race under any circumstances. So, these guys have to stop the bleeding and clean the horse up. They did succeed in stopping the bleeding by a dubious method of strapping Bold Personality's head to the rooftop of the stable, kind of like how we might throw our own heads back when we get bloody noses. That disaster dealt with as best as they could. They now had to address the sheer difference in colour between Fine Cotton and his ring-in. Fine Cotton was a rather dark brown, while Bold Personality was a very light brown. John Gillespie tackled this idea by travelling to all the local chemists and buying as much henna hair dye as he possibly could. That done, with the aid of half a dozen guys with rubber gloves, they started to rub in this hair dye into Bold Personality to make him look darker, which seemed to work. But this might have worked if horsehair was anything like human hair. As it was, the dye did not take to Bold Personality as intended. So they went away that evening feeling pretty good about themselves. Then they come back the next morning and go in to check on Bold Personality, and Bold Personality was bright red. Like, imagine Elizabeth I or an equine traffic light. I think, somehow, that should they present the horse in this way onto the racecourse, it just might stand out. People just might notice a bright red horse. There's not much they could have done here, so they tried to hose the horse down and rinse off all this hair dye. That done, the guys practically gave up as far as colour went and chose to rely on fuzzy memories of the officials at the racecourse. However, there was one part of the disguise that they could not ignore. Fine Cotton had white socks, whereas Bold Personality did not. There's an easy solution to that idea, of course. Can you guess what that might have been? I'll give you 15 seconds to work it out, and we'll see if your idea was the same as these criminal masterminds. So, if you said you get Aiden Haitana to present a can of white spray paint and immediately proceed to spray paint the feet of a soaking wet horse, you're a winner.
The doghouse.
Spray paint on a soaking wet horse is never going to take, so you can imagine the paint just leaking off, leaving marks. The end result was not pretty at all. These poor guys, and not to mention the poor bloody horse at this point, gone through all this work for practically no improvement at all. They basically waved the white flag as far as the colour issues went, and decided to, at the event when they got there, to throw a light rug over their chosen horse in order to conceal as much of the body as possible, and they also bandaged his lower legs to hide the lack of white socks. If all this were not enough, the lads suddenly realised They had forgotten to fit Bold Personality with racing shoes, and he was fitted instead for shoes for harness racing. So poor old Bold Personality, he's been given a rough, hot and dry trip to Brisbane, had a blood vessel burst in his nose after having a garden hose pulled out of it, had been turned completely bright red and subsequently washed off and painted with spray paint, and is now expected to be racing with the wrong shoes for Bold Personality. Alright, we'll leave the story here for the time being. If you have any questions about anything that's happened so far, please let me know in the comments and I'll answer them in the next video. I'll try to have part 2 out in the middle of the week. Let's just say that, as amusing as this all has been so far, the worst is yet to come. The drama does not stop, even when they go to the racecourse. Well, that's the end of part 1 today, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed it. So, until next time, take care of yourselves, look after each other,